Hey everyone, you are listening to the Self-Awareness Journey podcast. This little banter is about a car ride long and features your hosts, JJ Parker and Melissa Albers. JJ owns a tech company and Melissa has been a coach working with influencers for the last 18 years.
Melissa, a few years back, I had something happen in my life that I thought was really interesting. I was reflecting on it recently, and I think we should talk about it. So, a few years ago, I had a friend. We knew each other really well, years and years, since high school, right?
Yep.
And he went through a very big change in his life. He kind of had like a psychosis kind of event and kind of like a mental breakdown, and really struggled at his job, and it was a really tough time for him, right?
Yeah.
And he and I used to see each other like almost every day. Then this event happened. Didn't see him for like a year, and when we finally met up again, it was really interesting because when we met, he physically looked the same, but it's like, I remember describing it as like, I couldn't recognize him. I didn't recognize him anymore. Like we talked, we chatted, we did the chit chat, and hey, how you've been doing and blah, blah, blah. But underneath there, it was like not the same person. Right.
Yeah.
And it really got me thinking about how we recognize people.
Yeah. That's like such an interesting conversation to have. I'm looking forward to this. Yeah.
So we're on our 50th episode.
Oh yeah. Woohoo!
Which is awesome.
That's
right?
Cool.
And I thought this one, maybe we'd get a little bit less on the ground and a little bit more wandering around in the woods.
Yeah. That's my favorite spot, I'm always going to go a little on the deeper side of the pool in this conversation.
So I like this conversation. How do we recognize people, right? Mm-hmm. And when we were talking earlier, there's some basic ways that we recognize people, right? Mm-hmm. There's like the physical way, right? Like we see them,
in a crowd,
we recognize
or whatever.
their face, like, oh yeah, I know this person, right? I know I recognize my own family.
Yep.
There's actually a diagnosable trait for people who struggle recognizing people physically, which I thought was interesting. And I'm going to botch the name of it because it's impossible to say, but it's like prosopagnosia. And it's called face blindness. And it affects 2% of the population. And I think it affects me a little bit too, because I kind of struggle recognizing people.
I have my own theory on this. I'm not sure. I'm not sure you have this prognosis as much as you have extreme introversion and you avoid eye contact at all costs.
I can recognize everybody's shoes, but I can't recognize their face.
If they changed new shoes, we're in so much trouble.
Okay, well, I can't self-diagnose myself with face blindness, I guess, but we'll just say it's introversion.
But let's keep going. So
okay, so physically,
people.
Right? Yeah, you recognize them by their face. A lot of times you can recognize people by their actions, right?
Their body.
You ever see someone way in a crowd and they're I don't know, dancing around, and you're like, oh, that's my friend. You can't even see anything about them other than some goofy movement, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Or how they walk. There's certain gait.
Right?
Yeah.
It's really interesting that we're so good, humans are so good at identifying these subtle clues, right? Right?
Yeah.
Speech, or the way they talk, their accent, their cadence on their speech. A lot of times you can pick your friend's voice out of a busy crowd, right?
Yeah.
Which is another kind of amazing thing. So all those physical things, those are all well and good, but I want to talk about beyond that.
Yeah, but
right?
before you do, I want to also, I think instead of using the word just recognize other people, I feel like there's all sorts of associations that go along with that. I think like we connect with people because of what you're just referring to. Like we can feel like, if we have similarities in some of those things, similarities in how we like to swing our bodies around, our arms, or the way we talk, like if we like to get animated, other people that are that way, it isn't only a recognition, but don't you almost feel like it's an association? Like there's a lot of things about people that we are attracted to because of those things that they're kicking off. And I think it probably goes a little deeper than that, which I know we're going to talk about, but I think it's also an attraction, an association. It's a kinship, not just a recognition. I think it can be a recognition, but I think the spectrum is pretty wide.
Like you're saying, like I only hang out with other people that wear Adidas shoes.
No.
Like that kind of.
Well, you do have a lot of friends that have Adidas shoes, including me.
Well, you're kind of saying like sometimes physical. Are you saying like sometimes like that kind of physical appearance, like people like group together around those kinds of things, right? A certain fashion, like certain fashion statements people group around, right?
Especially in their younger ages, like when you're talking about high school or college, definitely. Yeah.
Even mannerisms, right? Like obviously mannerisms a lot of times in your family, right? Like your kids might have the same mannerisms as the parents, or like your friends will pick up for your friend group will like start talking or using the same kind of like colloquials or using the same, actions.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I was looking at some pictures of my dad and I not too long ago because, my dad was sick and had stem cell transplant. He was really sick for a while. He's great now. But when he is sick, I was looking at a bunch of pictures of the two of us and I'm laughing at this conversation because 80% of the photos that are of the two of us were standing exactly the same.
Yeah.
Isn't that funny? So that's one. So the physical piece.
So you can recognize the, like your family's, like you can recognize a family group or or a friend group based on some of these things.
Yeah, for sure.
So it goes beyond like just a individual recognition, but you're sort of like recognizing a group. That's interesting. I never really thought about that.
Yeah.
So, like we talked about those physical things. We talked about like speech. The other thing is like, I was thinking about like, can you recognize someone by the way they think?
Oh, that's interesting.
Right? Like by their thought patterns or like the way they process things. And that's like just a little deeper than the way they look or the way they act.
So when you say you're using the word recognize, and now you're talking about something a little deeper, you're thinking about a thought pattern or talking about a thought pattern. Can you give me like an example of that to help me get my arms around that a little more?
Well, so like,
do you mean like in a work environment, you would associate with someone earlier because you would recognize that their thinking pattern was one that you would benefit from? Do you mean like something like that? Like
maybe like, so, let's see. So like my own, here's an example for me.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I would say when I was younger, I didn't have a very developed view of like religion or spirituality or self-awareness, right? Or this topic.
Yeah.
Now I do, or I feel like I do.
Yeah.
We're on the path.
Well, there's always further to go,
right?
but yes, exactly.
But like the way I thought then and the way I think now is very different. And people will comment about how like, wow, you're thinking really differently now than you used to.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right? So it makes me wonder, do I look different to them? Does young JJ, is young J, is their perception of me different or like their recognition of me different? Because I maybe talk and think so differently than I did when I was younger.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, that's a great example.
Right?
Yep, that's very interesting.
And I think, like, if maybe you think back to like even your high school friend group, maybe you haven't seen them in 15, 20 years, you fast forward and like, well, they're way different.
Oh,
like
for sure.
something about them, you start, you kind of like meet them at whatever, your high school reunion, right?
Yeah.
Pick up some conversation. You're like, whoa, that's
Their
like a whole different person. I don't know what happened here.
Yeah, their life experience has altered who they were.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yep.
Not good or bad, just different.
Just different, right? And it probably, I would think it happens to a lot of people. Well, actually, I've got some high school friends that literally seem like exactly the same like they were in high school. And again, not good or bad.
Yeah.
Like it's actually like fairly comforting.
Yeah.
In some way.
Yeah. That's interesting.
But that's whether it's like it almost, like I said, it's like almost like a comfort thing. It's like I recognize them like they were 20 years ago.
Oh, I love that you just used the word comfort, because I think as human beings, we seek things that are comforting to us all the time. And if we can recognize certain bits of people that comfort us, that's that would be part of a real tribal thing again, right? It's like,
yeah,
I'm really down with this. You may have noticed that even in all of our conversation thus far, I've been a little quieter because I've been interested to listen to your way of thinking about this topic. One of the things that's so
you want to like, you're interested in my like bullet point analytical list of, hey, we're going to break this down in this methodical way.
Let's talk about how we recognize people and their energy. And I'm going to write out an analytical list. But I think it's super interesting, though. I really am interested in your perspective. And primarily the reason I am is because it's really different than mine. In this topic, it's so different than mine. So I'm super interested to hear how you break that down in your mind and how you think about it, because it's super unique to me.
So my next bullet point.
Yes.
So we just talked about how like the comfort, but the next one is like, how do people make us feel? Right. Mm-hmm. So when I was thinking about that idea, like I was thinking about like my mom, right? Like my mom makes me feel a certain way. If she stopped making me feel that way, would I recognize her as my mom?
Oh, huh.
Right? I mean, she might physically be my mom.
Sure.
Like she might physically still look like my mom, but if she stopped like making me kind of like feel like she does, which is like awesome.
Yeah.
Like how would that affect a relationship, right? I was like, is it possible that a lot of the way we recognize people is by how they make us feel?
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah, that's really interesting.
And if that person stopped making us feel a certain way, would we not recognize, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Yep. So that's an interesting perspective. I don't have that perspective because I believe that we make ourselves feel the way we feel, that other people cannot make us feel any sort of way. But I understand what you're saying. It's a little deeper than that. You're talking about the association of a really deep relationship right there. So that's a little more, it's a little harder to compare to commonplace other relationships in our lives. But for me, I recognize people's way of being as familiar or not familiar, but objectively, I don't get so much of how they make me feel. I'm more noticing how they feel as who they are. Does that make sense? Sort of.
No, we should talk about that part.
Let me give you an example. Here's Melissa diving off the deep end. You guys, this is always when JJ goes, "Now, Melissa, please keep the cookies on the bottom shelf. Let's not get too whacked out." My experience with recognizing people. Well, first of all, I've mentioned in previous pods that I moved 18 times, over 20 times by the time I was 18 years old. I was in multiple school districts and different schools. And I was constantly forced to be in partnership with different people. I was constantly forced figuring out how to morph my personality to get along with people. And that took a lot of learning about reading people's energies. I mean, it really did. And I wouldn't have called it that back then, or maybe even 5 years ago, but that's what it was. You know, it was like reading people and understanding what were the vibes. Maybe that's a better term we could even use. Like, what are the vibes that they're kicking off? And then making a decision how I would interplay with those people based on those vibes. And even today, like you're saying, recognize people, and you gave physical examples. You started talking about sort of some of their thinking patterns, and now we're talking about sort of their energy, recognizing someone for all of who they are, physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally. I actually, every single coaching session that I do, the very first thing that I do is what I read their energy. And it isn't even something that I am consciously aware of anymore. I consciously made the decision to start doing that a while ago, but it's unbelievable what you can notice when you are in observation, not judgment mode, like not judging, just observing. Like, I can tell by how that person is sitting or moving that their energy is lower. Like, I can tell by their facial expressions, their body language, how that they're feeling good today or that they feel anxious. Like, it's amazing how much you can recognize in someone. And then the more you get to know them and you recognize, you know, their habits, their physical habits, their mental habits, then you actually can recognize it even faster. So to me, it's really interesting to talk about their energy signature. Like, you talk about your mom, and I still to this day have never actually met your mom, but your mom is like, if I could pick a mom, I feel like I would pick her. Like, she's such a good, you know, it's so cute. Some of the stuff she says on her social media platforms and stuff. Like, she's such a good mom, but her energy is her energy, right? So
maybe like, I kind of get what you're saying. Like, I kind of came up at it like, how does someone make me feel? But maybe what I'm really talking about is that energy connection.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and at the very beginning of our conversation, I don't even know if we were talking about how they made us feel one way or the other. I mean, we were using examples of that because it's the easiest to describe this kind of topic when we use examples. But I think we do recognize people through a variety of ways. And I think it's really important to recognize that, you know, we do look at people's we look at people's eyes or, you know, their clothing, their gestures, all of those things to recognize someone or to understand who they are. I think we use this whole series of things at the same time.
Yeah. So let's talk about, like, here's what I'm curious about. I said, like, I recognize someone by the way they make me feel. You said, I recognize someone by their, like, energy signature. Right?
Yep.
I wonder if, so let's talk about
that's good.
Maybe I'm reading an energy signature, but I just don't really know that I'm doing that, and I just call that a feeling. Right?
Yep.
Like, because I'm an unsophisticated energy worker.
Please, that is ridiculous. No, well, let me give you.
Well, I think that probably happens, right? Like how many times have you, maybe, like, not you, me, gone up to someone and just interacted with them and been like, something's like a little off, but I don't really know what it is, and I can't really figure it out. And I just like, no, just move on, right, or something.
Yeah, you move on.
But maybe that's it right there. Like, what is that little what's that nugget?
Yeah. I love that. And I think that is us tuning into another person's energy. That's what that is. I mean, okay, like picture a little girl on a bus, okay, gets on a bus and she sits down to someone, next to someone, and that someone has a bit of a darkness about them, an energy that's heavier, not particularly nice. If it's a small child, a child will pick that up in 2 seconds and may even remove themselves and go sit somewhere else and not even think twice about it. So I think we have this built-in radar, and it's just a matter of if we have developed it or are consciously aware that that radar exists. And that is what I would call at a soul level. I would call that at a much deeper level of knowingness. That's our built-in compass.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like the child example is really interesting because I think a lot of us will have sort of these gut feelings.
Yes. Yeah.
But then, like me, my like analytical brain kicks in and starts saying, no, statistically I'm fine. And,
yes, exactly.
And we start thinking about, we start just like overanalyzing everything.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I think too, like, even though you used the example earlier, I think you're right. Like when you said how someone makes me feel, I don't think that's exactly what you meant now that we're talking this through. I think what you're recognizing is I was understanding who this person was, and I was noticing it didn't make me feel very good. It doesn't mean that they were enforcing a feeling on you. It was just that you were picking up on it somehow.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's super interesting. Like even if you, has there been anybody like where you haven't seen them for a really long time and you see them and all of a sudden you're really, really glad to see them. Like there's a recognition and an enthusiasm for seeing someone that you haven't seen for a long time. And the more you talk to them and their natural energy signature comes out, you start to go, oh my gosh, I forgot about this. Like, oh, I really like this person. Like you can start to remember the feelings. They start coming back just by what energy the person is emitting.
Oh yeah. So then now you just went the other way on it, right? Like that energy and then your feelings about that kicked in, right? And so now you're like recognizing that person through the feelings.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's the part. So like even in this whole topic, I think that we do recognize other people through a variety of senses. But I think that the senses that we recognize people are much, much more much deeper than just the physical attributes. And but you're right. If you're a more analytical person, it's natural to go to those places that feel more familiar. We spend way more time in our heads than we do in our hearts. And I think the whole process of the work that you and I do is to help people bridge that and be working just as equally in our heart, soul centered space than we do our head space, or certainly in partnership with each other as much as we possibly can.
So let me ask you this. How do we get better? So when we walk up to somebody, we start and we're going to interact with them. How do we get better at recognizing like their energy and like at that moment? Like, how do you do that? You say you do that.
I do.
Like, how can we practice that a little bit?
So I'm not going to be the person who knows all the answers, but I will share what I do. And this has worked for me really, really well. The first thing that I have done is I have removed my need for the person to be any certain way for me to be okay with them. So, and the only way I can do that is if I'm comfortable in my own skin. So I spend a lot of time not worrying about if I'm going to be loved or not loved in every exchange. And that sounds silly, but that was a really, really hard thing. And sometimes I still work at that. But the reason it's so important for me to not worry about other people that much in terms of are they making me feel good or not is because it allows me to be with those other people exactly as they are. And so much more happens that way. So I will, if I notice somebody's really, really off, the first thing that I do is I recognize, oh, that person seems off. Just like you were describing, JJ, exactly the same thing. My energy knowingness kicks up. My little gut reaction says something doesn't feel quite right. And so then I actually sort of make a decision that I am not going to allow whatever is going on within that person to enter into me. Like, this is not about me. This is about this other person. And I can still be with them, perhaps even support them, listen. I can even, I can choose to walk away if it's too much. But I can stay neutral and objective all the time. And then it allows me to see with clearer lens what I'm looking out at. Another way to say it is, if you're judging yourself harshly, everything that you look at will be through the lens of judgment. If you're loving on yourself a lot, the lens that you're looking at is in love. Whatever it is that you are looking in at yourself is what you are seeing the rest of the world in. And that applies to every other person and their energy that you're intermingling with.
That's like, I'd call it like projection. Like you're projecting.
Yeah.
Like instead of receiving these signals, you're projecting out your mood, right? Your energy.
Yeah.
And so you're saying like, hey, the key to recognizing other people is stop projecting your own energy out.
Yep. Or needing.
It's like it's like a force field or something. Right?
Yeah.
Like if you're projecting too much, it's preventing you from receiving.
Yes. Yeah. Or if other people are projecting too much because they have insecurities that they need you to make them feel good about, that's not your job. Right? That's not your job. So my coach actually has told me in the past, when you have to have some really challenging, tough conversations, picture yourself with almost a plexiglass between you and that other person. And you can see clearly and you can be supportive and helpful, but you don't soak in any of that stuff. Isn't that interesting to think about that?
That is super interesting. And in the topic of recognizing people, right, at this deeper level, we want to recognize their energy. What a great way to do it. I had not thought about the idea that like what I might be projecting out could be preventing me from sensing what's happening around me.
I just think as human beings, we want to be in partnership with other human beings so much. And that's fine, except that it oftentimes comes at our own expense. This is at this place where we start to give ourselves away, or we act the actor self that we talk about. We become the actor self. And people are doing that all the time. And half the people that you're interacting with at any given time are in their actor selves. So they're emitting certain energies that aren't completely who they really are for whatever reason. Maybe they're tired, or they don't feel well, or they're feeling sad, or whatever the case may be. And too often then we pick that up as our own and we take it personally. And that's when everything gets really messy. Whereas if we can just recognize where people are, because we've done the work to recognize who we are and be comfortable with that, it makes things a lot easier. It really does make everything easier.
That sounds good.
Yeah, doesn't it? Yeah, let's do that every time.
Let's do that. It just made me think about like so many things in our human experience is like we have these it's like well-intentioned actions that turn out to not serve us very well.
Yeah.
Right? It's a funny paradox of being a human.
Yes, it is. We're flawed. Humans are flawed. This is what I call job security.
Yeah.
We're all flawed, and it's a beautiful thing, actually.
Well, I am going to be intentional about like checking my own energy in the next couple interactions I have with people, and really try to stop projecting and start receiving a little bit more.
And maybe even rather than stop projecting, like just ask yourself, what am I projecting? Like that would be interesting. I wonder what I project. Like that's a really good thing. I think I've got a couple of calls today and I'm going to be thinking about that. It's super interesting.
All right. That's our homework.
That's our homework.
We hope that you've enjoyed today's episode. Our mission is to help people become happier and more effective by gaining insight into their own thoughts and feelings. We'd love your support. First, share this podcast with anyone you think might enjoy it. Second, leave us a rating or review on your favorite podcast site. This helps others discover the podcast so we can reach more people. And third, sign up for our newsletter at theselfawarenessjourney.com. This will help us communicate better with you and build our community. Thank you so much for joining us in the Self-Awareness Journey. We'll see you next week.